Hi, good morning. This is Joanna Nelson, and I am phoning in from rainy Santa Fe this morning from the state offices of the Economic Development Department, and we are broadcasting an exciting webinar today as a part of our FUNDIT webinar series, and the topic is how to utilize the U.S. Census data, the census data that's coming up, and how to use that information and effectively deploy that within your communities, and how will it affect your grant applications, and how you can better understand and calculate the census data. So we are joined today by with our NMEDD economist, Ryan Eustice, as well as Suzan Reagan, who's with UNM's Bureau of Business and Economic Research. So before we get started and I turn it over to Ryan, really quickly, I wanted to explain a little bit about what we do here on the finance team with NMEDD, if you're not already familiar with it. We do offer a variety of services here that relate to financing. So whether that is a business or a community that is looking for financing information, they can call us and we can assist. So that might be a type of technical assistance, whether it's walking through the loan process on the commercial side, or that might be looking at grants or some type of finance development packaging on the community side. We're here to help. So feel free to reach out to us on those services, and they're all free. And we also do refer people as well, where we refer to our wide variety of resources that we're connected with, like SPDCs and the economic development organizations within your communities. And then we also manage quite a bit of programs as well. And we oversee the Local Economic Development Act, the LEDA fund. We oversee FUNDIT, the New Markets Tax Credits, New Mexico Credit Enhancement Program, the Rural Efficient Business Program, and the newly released Opportunity Zone. So those are all being managed out of our office, and those are statewide programs. So please, if you have any questions about any of those programs, reach out to us and we'll get you more information on that. And in regard to this webinar, this is a part of the FUNDIT webinar series. Just to understand FUNDIT a bit, this is a group that we help manage, that is an informal group of funders that get together quarterly, and funders being that the people that come to the meeting are representing different financing programs on the state level and on the federal level. So these are representatives of USDA, SBA, Department of Transportation, etc., that have grants or loans that are available for communities. So what we do at FUNDIT is we receive applications from communities that have infrastructure projects or economic development projects, and those communities are able to present their project in front of this group of funders, the people with money, and at that meeting they can get feedback, they can get direct insight into the relative funding programs. They can network with funders. They can gain information from people that have had similar projects. So they're gaining a lot of information there and able to connect directly with the financiers. And on this next slide, you can get an idea of the funding partners that we have that participate. And part of the mission of the FUNDIT group as well is to provide education and information to communities across the state that are interested in financing programs that can be applicable to figuring out how they can fund their projects within their communities. So that's why we do these webinars, is to address a variety of topics that have to do with financing. And then as well, just one final slide to give you some more information about how to connect with our department within whatever region of the state that you are in. We have our New Mexico Economic Development reps that are located in 6 different regions of the state. So you can access this map on our website and get the correct economic development rep, and there are boots on the ground. They can help and assist with economic development questions and projects within your area. And then as well, if you're lucky to have a New Mexico Main Street rep, or you have an area within your community, the New Mexico Main Street office is housed under the New Mexico Development Department division. So you can access all this information on our website, which is gonm.biz, or call us, and we have all the contact at the end of the presentation. And would like to remind everybody that this presentation is being recorded. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel, that you can access it at a future date if you're not able to watch the whole thing right now. And then we also will be sending out the presentation PowerPoint at the end of the presentation too. And we will take questions. If you have questions that come up, feel free to type the questions in the questions box that is it should be in the right side of your screen in the GoToWebinar view. And so feel free to type questions, and we'll take them at the end of the presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll turn it over to Ryan Eustice, the NMEDD economist.
Thank you, Joanna, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. What we're planning on going over today is the U.S. Census, what's coming up in 2020, as well as all the data that you may not know is being produced by the U.S. Census Bureau and how to access that information. So with that, we'll get started. I'd like to introduce Suzan Reagan. She is amazing at what she does. She has been my pseudo mentor throughout my 2 years with the department in terms of looking for information and being able to locate pretty much anything that's readily available. So with that—
Thank you, Ryan.
Absolutely. So with that, we'll begin. And Suzan, every time that you or I are out there speaking and we're talking about the census, or we're talking about census data, we tend to get a lot of questions that are based from previous censuses or surveys that have taken place. So can you spend a few minutes and kind of discuss the history of the census in the United States?
I'd love to. One of the interesting things about the U.S. Census Bureau is it's the only agency that is mandated by the U.S. Constitution. And it was placed in the U.S. Constitution for the specific purpose of counting the population every 10 years to apportion seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. The very first census was conducted in 1790. And what's kind of cool about it is when you go back and you look at it, both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had expressed doubts that they actually had accurately counted all the people. They felt that there was a serious undercount with the first decennial census. So I'll just say, thinking about decennial censuses, it's traditional that we think that they undercount us.
So with that, we hear a lot of questions based around the census, and you hear terms around voting and how you're able to vote. But does the census redraw congressional lines?
Yes, it does. It not only does the House of Representatives and congressional lines, but it also defines state legislative districts. Sometimes it's used in assigning of school districts and other important geographies, such as metropolitan statistical areas. In fact, the U.S. Census Bureau boundaries for those types of geographies is the recognized official boundary lines used by other federal programs, including like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, when they estimate the unemployment rate for the Albuquerque metropolitan statistical area. They use the census boundary lines as the definition of how they collect data. And a lot of this data for the boundaries and everything is used to distribute federal funds, state and tribal. It's also the data that we use to that we base our research on and make decisions of things like how to build roads here or what services we provide to elderly.
Now, Susan, you spoke about the portion of seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. Are there some states that are at risk of losing a member?
As a matter of fact, there are several states this decennial census who are either looking to gain seats or lose seats. You know, California, Texas, I think North Carolina, those states, if you go and look at their budgets, they're actually budgeting a lot of money to make sure that their states aren't undercounted because they're on the line of whether they're going to gain new seats or not.
And earlier you spoke about the first decennial census and how both George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were concerned about the count. And it kind of started the concept of this idea of hard to count, where individuals are hard to come by and hard to find to make sure they're counted. Is New Mexico considered one of those places?
It is. In fact, the only state that's harder to count than us is Alaska. And if you look at Alaska and New Mexico, one of the things that we have in common is that we have very rural areas. And those are hard areas to count people. Other things that are hard to count are Native American Indians. Both Alaska and New Mexico have our fair share. And immigrant populations also turn to be hard to count, as well as minorities. So yes, New Mexico has a difficult time. And in fact, in 1990, we had one of the biggest undercounts in the nation.
So with New Mexico considered hard to count, are you able to explain why it's so important that individuals, that every individual is actually being counted and its ramifications?
You bet. So the George Washington University recently put out a publication where they researched, based on 16 of the large federal assistance programs, how much money per state is doled out. And these programs use population as part of the funding formula. In New Mexico, we receive about $3,000 a year per person from these federal programs. And if we were to have a 1% undercount, which would represent about 20,000 people statewide, that would be 20,000 times 3,000 times 10 years for the amount of funding that we could lose. It's a very large number.
So with each individual basically counting for $3,000 per year for the next 10 years, we're able to understand how important that is to the state, but to put it in terms of where that money actually goes to, so individuals, whether it's in a municipality or statewide, can understand where does that money go to and where does it flow?
So one of the big ones is the highway and planning and construction. Another big one is Medicare and medical assistance programs. Also, our Title I grants for local education agencies. Food lunch programs are funded. Head Start, early childhood is funded through these. Supplemental nutrition programs for women, infants, and children. Low-income housing. There's quite a few of these programs that affect low-income people day to day. So it's a very important fact that we don't be undercounted.
So we know the census does the decennial census, and are you able to obviously go into some more detail about what other programs that the census does offer that individuals may use?
Oh yeah. So the U.S. Census Bureau does a lot more than just the decennial census. Obviously, the decennial census is the big one because they're mandated to do it by the U.S. Constitution. In 2010, American Community Survey got up and running, and the American Community Survey is, in 2000, there was something called the long form. So during the decennial census, you had every household would receive at least the short form, and then, which has got 10 questions, and then 1 in 6 households would receive the large or the long form, which has about 60 questions on it. In 2010, instead of actually running that long form in conjunction with the decennial census, they decided to set it up as an annual program that goes every year. So the American Community Survey surveys the the population, and it's a sample every year and gives us a lot of data. Some of the other programs that come out of the Census Bureau is the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates. That's where you get your official poverty estimates from. They also do, between decennial census, they run what's called the source of the official population estimates between decennial census, the Census Population Estimates Program. They also conduct an economic census in the years ending in 2 and 7. So every 5 years they do the economic census, and they're wrapping that up right now. They do a survey of business owners, and that's where you get a picture or a snapshot of like minority-owned businesses and stuff. They also track non-employer statistics. That would be, in our terminology, sole proprietors or, you know, a single-person business. They do hundreds of economic indicators. They got the construction industry, manufacturing industry, new building permits, foreign trade. I could go on. There's a lot of different economic data that I follow that comes from the U.S. Census Bureau. They do a census of governments. If you want to know how much governments make, how much money they receive in their budgets, and how much they spend, and compare one state against another, you would use the Census of Governments data. They do a survey of income and program participation. That's your SNAP and TANF and food stamp programs. They do an annual survey of school system finances. If you want to find out how much money school systems receive and where they spend it, that's a good place to look at it and compare across states. And then finally, one of my favorites, they do the current population survey. They do that for the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that's one of the input into the monthly unemployment rate that you see. So they do a lot of data, and part of the difficulty of working with Census Bureau and their website is they have so much data, it's kind of trying to find the data you're looking for from the program you need.
Well, Susan, kind of taking a step back, you explained each program that the census does alongside the decennial census, but why do these programs matter to people, and are they actually used by individuals or businesses or governments to make decisions?
So the answer is yes, and we'll start with grant writers. Grant writers use this stuff to apply for grants because it's how you identify diverse populations that you're trying to access the grant for. They use the decennial census and the American Community Survey for that. Business owners use the economic survey, the economic census, to look at how their business is doing and how their industry is doing. And businesses also use the American Community Survey to identify the populations that they want to market their products to. As a matter of fact, most marketing companies use American Community Survey specifically for that purpose. I could go on. I use this data to do research on very interesting and answering interesting topics. So
well, you spoke about the decennial census and what we call the ACS, the American Community Survey. And I know there are some differences between the two, but specifically, what's the difference between the two, and what can the listeners take from that and go forward with?
So one of the things when you're trying to access data, and there's so much data out there, to keep in mind when you're going out there to find data is why you want the data, and whether you want 100% or a census of data, or you want survey data. And the difference between census data is census is always usually a point in time. It's a snapshot of the population and housing. And because it's 100% count, it's available down to very small geographies. And there's no margins of error because it's 100%. It's 100% count. But today is 2019, and we're 9 years out from 2010. So sometimes as you get further and further away from a census, you notice that the data isn't as current. What the surveys have that are better than a census, the 100% count, is one, it's more current because it's done throughout the decade, and it's done with annual updates. And sometimes you can also change the questions, so you'll have new or better questions. And because you're doing a sample, you can ask more questions. So there's more data or more subjects that are sampled. Problem with survey data is that it's limited for small areas. American Community Survey tries to solve that by putting out 1-year estimates and 5-year estimates. But oftentimes when you step into a very small geography, you will see that because of the sampling error, you'll see large margins of error.
So it seems like timing has a lot to do with getting the data, and the individuals that we work with ask a lot of questions of when should I get this data, when should it be used. But I think the first and easiest question is which data is more reliable, and can you then explain the topics that kind of go into that?
Well, so it really does depend on what you're using the data. You know, the fun thing is if you need very specific data, say on citizenship or language spoken at home, you actually want to use the American Community Survey because the decennial census only asks 10 questions. Well, and maybe 11 questions. But the American Community Survey has many more questions in the survey. It's almost 60 questions long. You can actually go out onto the Census Bureau's website and their American Community Survey pages and actually look at the questions they ask. And this slide here actually just represents a lot of the top subjects that are available from the American Community Survey. It's easier for them to add and modify questions, but over time you also need to know when you're pulling American Community Survey that if the question is changed a little bit, there may be some inconsistency if you're doing a year over year or a 5-year over 5-year comparison.
Well, it seems like obviously there's a lot of data available, and it's available to a specific amount of topics that people can look at, but more importantly, when do you know which data to use? Based off of population size, or is it based off of timing?
So my answer to that is going to be, it really depends on what you're using the data for. If you're using the data to apply for a grant from USDA or from HUD, they often specifically state you have to use 2010 data, that you can't use the survey data because they don't want to see the margin of error, and they know that that data is available. But you have to realize that when they're asking for that, you're going to get, and you're writing your grant, you're going to have a smaller, it's the short form, so you're going to have less topics. And it is constitutionally required, so 2010 data is never going to go away. I do know that there's been some talk about trying to do away with the American Community Survey, but the data that you get out of the American Community Survey is so much more comprehensive. So in some cases, when you're looking at populations and you want to do a lot of analysis, the American Community Survey data is better.
So I know when I first took this job, Susan, I was surprised to see, by looking at the Census Bureau website, everything that they offer, and it's a lot more than just, you know, the decennial census. And in my small mind, what I was thinking was, oh, this is just, you know, a population total. But specifically, what other products are being offered, and can you go into some detail to explain that?
So one of the ways to narrow down and focus your search when you're looking for data is to understand the different products the Census Bureau puts out for serving up data. And they do both, Decennial Census and the American Community Survey have these products. One of the top products I usually tell people when they're an American Fact Finder and trying to pull data is to use a data profile. The table ID on it will actually say DP, and there are 4 of them, and one is housings, one is demographics, one is economics data, and one is social characteristics. Those data profiles are a lot of the different subjects that you can pull, both from Decennial Census and from the American Community Survey. And usually 90% of the data people are looking for fall in those data profiles. So as a quick shot for finding data quickly, aim for the data profiles. Comparison profiles, usually the table ID starts with a C, and they actually will take a single variable, such as household median income, but you can look at it for your geography across the years. And so the comparison profiles are really helpful if you're trying to do a time series. There are some selected population profiles that specifically use race, ethnicity, ancestry, and tribal groups and show a lot of data for those variables. There are some things called subject tables, which are kind of high-level tables. They're similar to data profiles, except they usually are a little bit more focused on the subjects. There are ranking tables, so if you want to pull household median income for all counties in New Mexico, it'll rank each county. Those are fun tables if you're trying to compare or ranking your stuff. Detailed tables differ from the data profiles in that a data profile will say for the population, males and females, here are the age groups. In a detailed table, you can actually look at male and female by single age, all the zeros, all the 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, so that you can actually look at the very detailed breakouts by age, whereas at a data profile level, you're going to have them grouped. So detailed tables usually, when you're an American Fact Finder, start with the letter B. Don't know why, but that might help you as you're looking for data. They also provide some geographic comparison tables where you can easily compare geographies over time. They do some thematic maps. And then finally, my favorite is, and if you're really into deep diving into data, is the public use microdata sample file. You use this when you need a very complex crosstab. And an example of that would be, I want to look at single female head of household and their age and their education level. That's not a typical tab that you're going to get in a data profile or even in the detailed tables. It's a very specific crosstab that's not already done, and you can use the public use micro sample file to come up with those.
So Susan, you really explained well each product and how within those products we're able to get micro level data. But my question has always been, does the census allow you to look at smaller individual population sizes? And if it does, what's there to know about it, and when to use those specific products based on population sizes of let's say, a census tract?
So specifically, if you're using decennial census, you can go down to the smallest group, which is a block, and look at data by block. But that only comes out every 10 years. In the American Community Survey, you get 1-year estimates, and 1-year and 5-year estimates are available for areas with a population of 65,000 or greater. When you look at areas of, say, 20,000 or more, you only have 5-year estimates. And in fact, when you step below populations of 65,000, you only have 5-year estimates. 5-year estimates go down to census tract level and block groups, but not down to blocks. So the only time you can look at block population levels will be decennial census. Anything larger than that, you'll have to look at the 5-year estimates. Geographies or population-wise, 5-year estimates are available for block groups, census tracts, areas of 20,000 and areas of 65,000, and you only get 1-year estimates for the 65,000 or more.
Well, Susan, on your slide, it shows 1-year and 5-year estimates, 5-year estimates, and the question that I have, which may be dumb, is when do those come out? I know it's every 1 year or 5 year, but is there a specific timing, or is it staggered?
Yep. So the 1-year estimates, and 2017 was released at the end of September. 1-year estimates come out in September. The 2017 5-year estimates will come out the first week of December. So the 5-year estimates are always released in December, and the 1-year estimates are always released in September.
Wonderful. Well, I think you did a great job at layering everything that the census offers, not only from the decennial census, but all the way down to the yearly surveys. So it seems like there's a lot going on at the Census Bureau, but we know that some stuff's coming up. So what's in the pipeline and what's coming up next?
So the big thing that's coming up next is the 2020 census. And just so you know, preparations have been going on since 2010. The U.S. Census Bureau has an operational plan And yes, I have read the operational plan, but only before bed because it will put you to sleep. It's almost 200 pages long. If you have any questions on what has happened or how the 2020 census is going to be run, you can actually read it out there in their operational plan. There have been a lot of key decision points that have already come and gone, such as how are the questions going to be worded and what sort of translations are we going to provide. Those benchmarks and stuff have already occurred in the 2020 census timeline.
Well, Susan, I know in 2010, there was a lot of complaints about how expensive the census was. And I know there had been rumblings about specific changes, not only to the questions, but to how they were going to conduct this census. Can you articulate and explain to people some of the changes that have occurred?
So the biggest change for the 2020 census is going to be the first census that is conducted online. And the whole purpose, like you mentioned, was to save funding. They know that if they can have people respond to the census online in the privacy of their own home, they'll actually have better statistics than if they send out people, enumerators, to count people. The other thing that should raise a red flag in everybody's mind who's listening today is that we're such a rural state. There's a lot of areas in New Mexico that have no online connections. Well, in the census plan, one of the things that they're planning on doing is partnering with the U.S. post offices so that people who receive their mail in rural communities at post office boxes will have a kiosk in those post office areas where they could fill out their survey online at the kiosk. They're also going to work with libraries across states, and they'll also be, I'll talk more about this, partnering with community centers and other groups to provide these kiosks out there. However, they're not going to rely just on online responses to the census. What they're going to do is send out the postcard in the middle of March of 2020 saying, fill out your census online. If people don't fill out their census online, they're actually still going to mail out a hard copy form to everybody the first week of April. And then at the end of April, they'll send another postcard reminding people to fill out their census form. In May, they'll start what's called non-response follow-up, and they'll have enumerators actually come out to those houses who have not responded to either the online or the paper survey. And these people, enumerators, will knock on their doors and ask to fill out the census for them. They'll knock on a door up to 6 times, and at the 6th time, if they're not able to count the people in the unit, they will then talk to housing units around to see if they can identify how many people live in a housing unit.
Well, I think this is a good point to stop and kind of address the elephant in the room, and I know it's super cool we're going online with this survey. But are there concerns about going online? I know when I was at the census conference, this question came up, and I don't want to say they were dancing around the question, but there were a lot of unanswered portions of it. Are you able to kind of go into detail about the concerns that you've heard about this census going online?
So there are a lot of concerns, and the Census Bureau has probably done a lot to try to address the safety. They've put a lot of money into putting in new computer systems with the highest security that we have out there today. They've done a lot of work on their part, and I know that even the enumerators who are going to go out and knock on people's doors are going to have handhelds, and they've looked at the security on the handhelds. So they've addressed a lot of those issues up front to the best of their ability.
Well, I think the real next question is, it's October and 2018, it's almost 2019, so we know the census is literally right around the corner. And you outlined a lot of the month-by-month timeframes that will take place when they're actually conducting the census. But what about the build-up to the census? What sort of timetable is there, and what's going on there?
So there are a lot of programs that run out ahead of a decennial census to ensure that the census can do their job and count people and deliver data to us. You'll see that the timeline is there's been a lot of tests done. They just finished the 2018 end-to-end test that was done in Rhode Island. And some of the reports on that are coming out. And we should have a more complete knowledge of how that end-to-end test went later this fall. But I know early look at it was that migrants or new migrants into Rhode Island were less likely to respond than other people, and that was not surprising. Right now, they're ramping up to do the on-the-ground address canvassing, and most of our tribal areas will have the on-the-ground address canvassing running up. There's some other programs that people within the state will need to be responding to in the next couple of months.
Well, Susan, you said that the census just finished conducting a test in Rhode Island, and I know Rhode Island's all the way on the East Coast, but how does Rhode Island actually compare to New Mexico? Does it compare, or are we looking at a data set that we can't get any information from?
So the end-to-end test actually wasn't built to say, does New Mexico fit this? There were some other U.S. Census tests earlier in the timeline that probably did areas like New Mexico that did test different ideas. The 2018 end-to-end test was more to, it's not a data product, so to speak, but to test the actual process of conducting the census online and how good it was. And initial looks at that, people did actually use the online kiosk to respond to that test.
That's wonderful. So it's good to see that things are evolving, well, with age, I guess, you know, hopefully it works well. Well, I know currently there are some things that are taking place. Are you able to elaborate on what's going on right now?
So one of the big programs that runs out ahead of a decennial census is, and it only happens once every 10 years, it's called the Participant Statistical Areas Program. And if you ever wondered how small communities who are not incorporated were on the pull-down list when you're trying to select your geography, this is the program that they participated in. So incorporated small towns and cities automatically are in the pull down because they have to report through the boundary and annexation program to show their boundaries on an annual basis with the Census Bureau. But unincorporated areas don't. And so the only time they can actually get themselves designated as a census designated place is during the PSAP program. The initial program started July 1 with a mail out to counties and to the councils of government in New Mexico and all the tribal areas. And those who are participating responded back. So if you know of a small community that is not a census designated place but would like to be one, they can reach out to either their county representatives or one of the council of governments and ask to become a census designated place. So this only happens once every 10 years, and those communities will really benefit from participating in this program because it gives them statistics already combined for their geographies. If they're not a census designated place, what I have to do as a researcher is go out and figure out which blocks and sum the blocks and then estimate if I've got the right blocks and estimate if I've got the right data for their, it's a lot harder. And it really is kind of a barrier if they're trying to apply for grants for things like their water system or a new fire engine. So it really does benefit those local communities to participate.
So there's a lot going on at the national level. There's obviously programs taking place at the state level to encourage local support for the census. But is there anything going on where there's a collaboration of sorts?
Certainly. The U.S. Census Bureau has something called the Partnerships Program. And at the national level, nonprofits and very large companies are partnering with U.S. Census Bureau directly so that they can do outreach and encourage people to actually fill out and participate in the census. The other thing is that the partnership program helps local people form what's called complete count committees, both at the state level and then in cities and towns and statewide. Recently, in July, the Census Bureau hired Veronica Arzate de Reyes to be the New Mexico Census Partnership Specialist, and she has been reaching out and working with people to form complete count committees, who really are the people, the trusted voice to reach out to local people and encourage them to participate in the census and fill out their form. And I understand, Ryan, that from the statewide, you participated in the governor's setting up of a complete count committee.
Yeah, we had a meeting, a couple months ago in which a couple members from the Census Bureau as well as our regional representative from the Census Bureau came down and did a good explanation of not only what is taking place, but kind of what is the state's role in all of this from an educational standpoint, and not only what we need to learn, but how we take that information in and then spread it to other cities and other areas within the state to help form their own complete count committees. So it is a top-down approach, and then once it reaches the state level, we start working from the bottom up to make sure areas are covered, and not only covered but educated so they can answer questions in a public setting that helps the public become comfortable with the upcoming 2020 census. And Susan, kind of jumping back here, you spoke about enumerators. What is that? And it can't just be a person who's just knocking on the door. Can you explain that a little better, please?
Oh, I'd love to. So the interesting thing about the census is every decade, it's the largest mobilization of a workforce outside of a war. So the U.S. Census Bureau hires a lot of people, and they like to hire local, trusted people to actually be enumerators, and those are the filled jobs, and those are the people who go out and knock on a door if somebody hasn't filled out their census form, and actually conducts the census and does the count or enumerates the number of people in there. The census is getting ready to open up the Albuquerque and the Las Cruces offices, field offices, and they're slated to open up early in 2019, and they're right now hiring for the staff who will populate those offices. And then next August will be the really big ramp up as they go out and they hire enumerators starting next August all the way through December.
Now, Susan, we went through a ton of information, and I consider you to be one of the national experts in not only explaining this information, but helping people like myself find this information online. What do you tell people when they say, how do I access this, and who do I get help from in accessing this information?
So, Ryan, you and I participate in something called the State Data Center Program, and there's a State Data Center Program in all the states. And in New Mexico, we have a bunch of affiliates who work with us, and we provide training, additional training to our State Data Center affiliates. And a lot of these affiliates are libraries. There are also the small business development centers, and some of our government agencies participate, and some of our municipalities participate. So you can actually reach out to anybody in the State Data Center Program.
Well, where do I find that information? If one of the listener goes, I'm doing a grant, I need to find this information, where do I find an affiliate in my area to help me answer these questions and find this supporting data?
Well, both the Economic Development Department's website and the Bureau of Business and Economics website, research website, have a list of all of our participating affiliates. And you can reach out to them, or you can reach out to Ryan or myself.
Now, Susan, before we conclude the webinar and then open it up for questions, I wanted to say thank you and to let all the listeners know the resources that you guys have available. And in particular how awesome Suzan is at not only explaining this, but helping you find data and allowing you to ask questions that help you look at things from a different standpoint. So thank you, Suzan, for everything that you did today, carrying all the water for this presentation, as well as being a resource for the state. It is greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Ryan.
And so with that, Joanna, we'll turn it over to you and open it up for questions if there are any.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan, and thanks, Suzan. That was really fascinating, and just reiterating how important it is to participate and get those numbers collected, and so we can reap the benefits from that. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and type them in. We got a comment that says kudos to Ryan and Suzan, but so far I don't see any questions coming in. That means you guys did a really great job at explaining everything.
I actually have a question, if I could, and this
sure.
one's kind of the low-hanging fruit. Suzan, there's a lot of news around the census for the first time that I can remember. I'm only 28, so it's not like I've been through a lot of these. But there's an in particular question that keeps getting brought up around the census. Can you address that, please?
So this decennial census, it's been proposed that it have 11 questions and not 10. And the 11th question is to ask your citizenship. A couple of things to note on this. Citizenship is already a question that's asked in the American Community Survey, so the data on it is already available. And so it's not really needed in the decennial census. Even if the question is put on the form, my particular take on this is I really want people to fill out the form, and I want them to fill out the home form, and I want them to fill it out as accurately as they can. And I would note that if they really don't want an enumerator to come knocking on their door, they should just fill out the census form. The last date that we could actually have the question removed, and the Census Bureau is moving forward as if that question will be part of this decennial census. The last date it could actually be removed from the lineup of questions will be July of 2019, and that's when they send all the forms out to the printer.
Well, one thing I'd like to share as well, and it doesn't seem like there's any questions, is one thing that I've seen, and when I've been out doing these talks to communities, is some community members go, we're going to boycott the whole census, we're not going to be counted. And my first response is, no, please. Each individual counts for $3,000 over the next each year for 10 years. So obviously pay attention to what's going on in the news, as well as contacting your local representatives to stay in touch and get as much information as you can, as well as express your opinion. But with that, if there are no questions, Joanna, I'd like to say thank you, and our contact information can be found on our websites. And if you have questions about grants, please don't hesitate to let us know.
Okay, Ryan, thanks. And there was one question that did come in, which was, can we get a copy of the PowerPoint deck? Which the answer to that question is yes. I'll be sending this out hopefully today. And then the rest of the question is to present in their local community. So I'd throw that out to Ryan and Suzan to say, is it okay for the participants to disperse the information?
Suzan, can you explain what's coming up in November?
Oh,
around what you're putting on for individuals.
So in November 15th, we do a New Mexico Data Users Conference. It's an annual conference. This will be our 20th one that we've put on. And we bring in U.S. Census Bureau speakers. I have 5 Census Bureau speakers on my agenda for the day, and another 10 in-state speakers to talk about data. So if you want further information on accessing census data and more specific data, I recommend that you come to that presentation. Above and beyond that, though, if you want local presentations and you'd like to set up complete count committees, please feel free to contact Veronica Arzate de Reyes with the Census Bureau. from that slide we had earlier, because she actually is available to come and speak at local communities who are trying to set up complete count committees.
And one of the things that I, as the state data center lead, as I am, and basically it's Susan, she's kind of the woman behind the curtain, is I'm more than happy and willing to come out and to do this presentation from an educational standpoint, but I would strongly recommend bringing the Census Bureau representative out as well to probably lead or accompany me just to explain the importance of this. And there's also times in which you can do, and it doesn't have to be in person, we're able to do this over the phone, is kind of walk you through the information that is available and how to access that information and kind of know what you're looking at, because it's extremely overwhelming whenever you pull up American Fact Finder and you see 700 tables for the state of New Mexico and knowing which individual table to choose. So please, if you'd like to schedule something, whether it's in person, let us know, or the state rep know, or if you're looking for specific information, please don't hesitate to call.
Okay, great. Thank y'all. And then we did get another question in regard to the presentations, and that is, when can we get a copy of the presentation? And I'm hoping to get that out by the end of the day, so you should have that in your email. So I think that concludes the questions. And just really quickly wanted to share with you all some upcoming NMEDD Finance Development Team events. Our next webinar series will be Brownfields 101, and you'll be able to register with all of these links or access these links when we send the presentation out. The New Mexico Infrastructure Finance Conference is coming up, and that is actually this week. It starts on Wednesday and goes until Friday. That's going to be in Isleta this year. And we have a couple of panels that we're hosting. One we're actually doing, it's called Beyond Government Grants. So we have a panel of experts that are talking about different perspectives and insights and sharing best practices about looking beyond the government grants. So looking at partnering with nonprofits and looking at foundation money or our debt capital, and what does that look like for communities that are trying to finance infrastructure and economic development projects. And then our other one that's really exciting that Ryan is actually going to be participating in is addressing opportunity zones. And that's actually the same day, which that's on Thursday. I think the Beyond Government Grant starts at 1:45. And then the opportunity zones start at 3:30. So if you're in the area, feel free to stop by and check out those presentations. We're going to try to record those and get those on the YouTube channel as well if you're not able to make it. And our Rural Efficient Business Program workshop, our upcoming event will be in Carlsbad, and that will be December 5th. This is open for any businesses that are interested in learning more about energy efficiency and how to reduce their energy consumption, how to apply for USDA, the Rural Energy Efficiency Program, the REAP grants that can finance renewable energy systems. So that is December 5th in Carlsbad. And then our FUNDIT meeting, our last one of the year, December 11th, November 29th is the cutoff. And then just a reminder that we are accepting and enrolling lenders and businesses into our credit enhancement program. That's our new financing program that enables us to help businesses that have a shortfall in collateral that are trying to get a loan. So we're able to participate in those projects and hopefully make it easier for the bank to close the deal on those commercial loans. And then these are our contacts for the finance team here at the department. Juan Torres is the team leader, Joel Salas, and myself, finance development specialist. And then you can access our programs on our webpage. And with that being said, that sums up our presentation, and I'd like to extend another big thank you to Ryan and Susan for all the great information, and we will be sending this information out, so feel free to spread the word, and please let us know how we can help. and hope to see you at one of our events, and please attend one of our upcoming webinars. So thanks very much. Have a great morning.
Thank you, Joanna.
Bye.
Thank you, Joanna.
Thanks, Ryan. Bye.